The outer sphere, that is the world we can see, feel, touch, smell and hear, the sensory world. But the world we are talking about is much more ethereal, much more spiritual, so invisible for our physical eyes. There arises the first point of life, the source being, a god, a deity, an oversoul, give it the name you like. The ancient Greek and Gnostic spoke about the logos, which means the word. The first Christians adopted that word, you find it in the Gospel of John. The logos is the root, the word, the first beginning of a hierarchy. And you may know that in the Gospel of John, those who are Christians know that, there is stated, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by that Word. Without it, nothing was made that has been made. How? Did the Logos, did that Word created our universe? No. All these things arose by a process of emanation, which means from that primordial point, a ray of life, an emanation, flowed forth, an eon, to use the Gnostic term. And that emanation stood at a slightly lower level than the source being, which was the first, the primordial point. That first emanation now transformed the life again, poured it out, and thus another world was formed, slightly lower, slightly coarser, less spiritual, more material. That being, or that world, was thus an emanation of a higher being, a source being, but it was itself also a source being because it poured forth the life or the consciousness to a lower sphere. And so you get a lightly lower being, a being a little bit less spiritual, less ethereal, and that being pours the life to a still less ethereal, still less spiritual sphere, and so on. Compare it with a river or a canal, which originates high in the mountains. The water flows down, and then there is a canal lock, a sluice, through which the water passes on its way to a lower level. And there is another sluice, and so on, and so on. And this comparison is even more correct if you imagine that the locks itself are made of water too. They are made of the same life, and they sluice the water, they sluice the life to a lower area, that is to a less spiritual, a more material world. Well, in the Gnostic writing, it is stated that the lowest of these worlds is our world of senses, where a blind god, the demiurge, sometimes it is called the God of the Old Testament, Jehovah, where that demiurge holds sway. But it is also stated that Adam, the man, the human being, actually belongs to a higher world, a world which is much more higher than the material world. Well, these Gnostic myths are certainly not unique. In the sacred books of India and the flowery language of the Puranas, the holy book of books of India, you can find dozens, I think hundreds, maybe thousands of myths which also describe the process of emanation. You find it, for instance, in the holiest book of the Hindus, the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna, and Krishna is the oversoul, states, I establish this whole universe with a single portion of myself and remain separate. Do you see the image? Yeah? Krishna, source being, pours out from himself a stream of life, stream of consciousness, and that stream becomes the universe. That stream flows through several links, locks, transformers, which are all source beings as well, albeit on a lower level, and find its endpoint, relative endpoint, because there are no absolute endpoints in this material world. The entire universe flows out from Krishna, and yet he remains separate. Can you follow me? Difficult. Have any questions? Not yet. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? Let me continue. Well, actually, we human beings do the same as Krishna, albeit on a lower level. When a man is born, he wakes up from his dream world, which we call death. And then he created an atmosphere as well. He pours out of himself an atmosphere, and all elements which have the same characteristic as he has are attracted to that atmosphere. Let's take the physical body as an example. It's almost always the easiest because we can see it. The ovum, the egg cell, is fertilized, and on the physical plane a focus or a nucleus has arisen. All living building blocks are attracted to that focal. And what are those building blocks? Well, we just talk about it. That are the cells, which make up the vehicle of the human being, the atoms, the particles of atoms, all those living building blocks, those live atoms, are attracted to the human being. You must bear in mind that the process of emanation is not a process of creation. A being is not created. That being existed already. You rather imagine it as follows. A source being creates a certain atmosphere in or on which other beings can live. Let me illustrate it with an example. I'm a teacher and I want to have my own school. I want to start my own school, a secondary school, and I have certain educational principles, no frontal instruction, no school where students are not allowed to have any initiative, no school where teachers put something into the students, but rather a school where teachers help students to develop themselves. I have my ideas, and I'm looking for teachers who operate according to the same principles. I find a math teacher, a teacher of English, teacher of French, history teacher, or rather they find me, or maybe even better, we find each other. They all have more or less the same characteristics I radiated, I emanated. Yeah? They are all teachers who want to work according to the same principles as I want to do. In a sense, I emanated those teachers. They come from me. Not literally, of course, but I created an atmosphere in which they can live. Then we try to find children for our school. Parents come along. We have conversations with those parents, and some parents don't like the system. Other parents are enthusiastic. They like the system, they like the school, and they put their children on our school. So those parents and those children are also attracted to our atmosphere. An atmosphere the teachers and I emanated. Well, that is the picture. That is the comparison. So the primordial essence, the oversoul, creates an atmosphere to which other beings are attracted. And why are they attracted to it? And to answer that question, we need to recall the second fundamental proposition, the law of cyclicity. All beings arising from a source being, that means all beings who are attracted to the atmosphere of that source being, arising from that source being, have in previous lives also lived and cooperated with that oversoul, with that source being. So when a universe is born, when a cosmic being passes from a state of rest into a state of activity, then all those beings, those entities who were with him during his previous embodiment, in that previous embodiment they were also emanated from him, will work again with him in this new embodiment. Yeah? Compare it again with a human being who is born. He will gather again all those building blocks, thoughts, feelings, desires, spiritual aspirations, because all those thoughts and feelings and desires are living beings. So the living thoughts from former lives are attracted to him again. Similarly, all those living building blocks, the live atoms which make up his body, the cells, the atoms, are attracted again to him because they have the same characteristics. Gained from previous lives, they had worked together. And you see, that process of emanation emerged from the top of a hierarchy, leads to the same laws everywhere. As above, so below. What are those laws? Those laws are in fact the habits of beings. Our laws of nature, are the habits of cosmic beings. Their habits patterns, are our laws. Not only the law of physics, such as the law of gravity, a law we try to understand for centuries, but still understand not really the core of it, I think. But there are also patterns such as cyclicity, the law of cause and effect, the law of hierarchies, and so on. And if you think a little bit more about this fact, then it will give a very inspiring and beautiful thought, I think, because you understand that there is a very close relationship between us, human beings, and the gods. We live in their patterns, in the habit patterns which arise from them, which have everything to do with their lives and their actions. Well, this might be hard to understand, but if you compare it with our patterns, our habits, you see the parallel. Our habits are the laws for the beings who live within us. For instance, the atoms and the cells. There is one law, as above, so below. So your habits, my habits, are the laws for these undeveloped living beings. Also the thoughts you think are living beings, so you are the law of nature for those thoughts, as you are the law of nature for the atoms in your body. Similarly, the habits of the gods are for us immutable laws, although those gods evolve. It's the same for, let's say, an atom in my right hand. One fleeting thought for me is for an atom in my left hand an eternity, because his life is much shorter than my life. In the same way, the patterns, the actions of gods for us are an eternity, are immutable laws, although those gods evolve and change their habits, but that takes place in such a huge time span that it is an eternity for us. Now the gods act together. They live together, just like humans. There's always an interaction between the various divine beings, and this interplay between and interdependence of the wills and consciousnesses of those divine beings constitute our laws of nature. The laws of nature are not something by itself, not independent variables, but they are the results of the actions of these cosmic beings. On our human scale, you can conclude more or less the same. The interaction between humans determines to a large extent the laws of nature for the less developed beings. And the closer those beings live with us, the animals, for instance, the greater the influence we exert on them. So you might imagine that human activity determines for a dairy cow or for a pig in the bio-industry all their laws of nature. The fact that we like to eat a lot of meat and we want to buy that meat as cheaply as possible determines the habits for those sad pigs. Yeah? Those sad pigs are subject to that habit. So fully are they subject to it that they can hardly follow their own inner nature. So we humans are also bound by all kinds of laws. For example, we're unable to fly or to go to other planets, but that doesn't mean that we have no free will. We certainly have, but it depends on our level of development, our level of evolution, but that we want to tell you after the break. So, what did I tell you? We talked about three fundamental propositions: the boundlessness, cyclicity, and uniformity and growth, progressive evolution. Each being is a part of another being and is itself made up of still other beings. They all come from the same source. Emanation, coming into being of entities by outflowing from the source, which remains at its own level. This creates a hierarchy of life. A source being creates an atmosphere in which beings with similar characteristics can manifest themselves. The process of emanation is repeated on each step of the hierarchy, and the habits of cosmic beings are our laws of nature, just like our habits are laws for less developed beings. So, any questions? Yes.
I think I have a question. So you attract beings that have worked with you before, but does that also mean that there is no beginning of that cooperation in boundlessness? So you work together and you attract each other, there's several layers of the hierarchy, but is there no beginning in that then either?
No, absolute beginning, I think. But you may, because there is free will, you may change your characteristic. For instance, we are all attracted, well, maybe, don't take me wrong, but let's say that I'm the source being, yeah? Or we are the source being. So you are attracted to a kind of atmosphere, and you have something in your consciousness which corresponds with something I emanated. But it may be that you are disappointed and you say, well, I don't like this atmosphere, and so you are free to go your own way. And then the next lecture in October, you will not be attracted to this atmosphere.
So it's not a definition that you only attract the beings that have worked with you before, you can attract new ones as well.
Yes, but in the beginning when you are born, then you are automatically attracted to the source being which you worked in the previous life. But during that life, and for atoms it's more difficult, I think, than for human beings, because we have our free will is developed in a larger extent than, for instance, animals or plants. But in a certain way, for instance, if I change my habits, suppose I'm eating a lot of meat, and a certain day I decide to stop eating meat, then certain atoms are not attracted to me anymore, and I will develop a new atmosphere in my mind and also in my body, and I will attract other atoms to my constitution. Yeah? So there is not, the free will is a very important thing in theosophy. There is cooperation, but you are not forced to cooperate. Yeah?
Yeah, you can say, well, as soon as free will is starting, the dynamic is coming in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the greater the free will, the more dynamic the situation will be, I think.
Can be.
Yeah. Any other questions?
May I want to try? Earlier we talked about that sometimes thoughts are, it feels like remembering stuff, you know, it's like a puzzle, that the little pieces come into the puzzle. So can I see that as a process of emanation also, that during our life that's continuing?
Let me try to understand you. You mean that when you think a new thought, you feel that that thought is familiar, you are familiar with that thought?
Yeah, sometimes it's a situation that are the ideas, for example, the Theosophical ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's so logical, it's so...
Well, I think that, you know, everything has a period of rest and a period of activity. And it may be that in this life, for instance, you have certain thoughts, theosophical thoughts, for instance. You die and you will be reborn after a period of rest. And those thoughts, those theosophical thoughts, will not come to you immediately, maybe when you're 30 or 40 years. So in a way, you have emanated those thoughts, and they had a longer period of rest than the thoughts about food, and the thoughts about your mother, and the thoughts about, yeah? So it's quite logical that that you are familiar with those thoughts because you have thought them already in previous lives. Yeah.
Okay.
You want a question for me?
No.
No, I'll have one for you. Yes.
Not too difficult, hey?
I mean, well, perhaps you will talk about that after the break, but you paint us a very nice picture about the cosmos and that is being governed by law and order. But what's the reason why in our daily life these days, and when we look at news and look what's going on in the world, we do not see so much of that law and order at this moment?
Well, in a way, we see law also, but because the law is in fact, our human law is in fact the state of our minds. So, if we are in our minds a little bit selfish, or we can see the interrelationship between all beings, and we put ourselves on the first place, yeah, our laws will represent that idea of our minds. So the question is, why don't we see the real purpose of life? Why don't we see the interconnectedness of all beings? Why don't we see that in the cosmos compassion and universal love are the most important factors? Why don't we see that? Well, that's because we are a little bit blind, we have free will, and we look more to the outer world. It's not because we are bad, but we are innocent. We don't see the real state of things. Yeah, we take illusions for reality. We think that the outer world is more real than the inner world. And in that process of evolution, eventually we will discover that there are more important things than the outer world, and we will develop those more spiritual aspects in our mind, and eventually we will be more in accordance with the laws of the cosmos. So, we Theosophists are not pessimistic, even when the world is sometimes a mess. But we know that in ourselves and in every human being there are noble aspects as well who will be developed. And like the Buddhists say, everything, every atom, every being, every entity has its Buddhic nature. So in the course of time, that Buddhic nature will be developed. So one day we all will understand the laws of nature and live according to it. That's a beautiful thought for the tea, I think. Yeah? So, break. 50 minutes.